Sarah's life appeared flawless: a successful career in marketing, a loving husband, and a picturesque home in a tranquil suburb. Every morning, she woke up to the golden light filtering through her bedroom curtains, feeling grateful for the life she had built. However, beneath the surface, Sarah couldn't shake a nagging feeling of emptiness, a sense that something crucial was missing. This vague unease gnawed at her, but she buried it, focusing instead on her daily routines and responsibilities. One day, while at work, Sarah received a message from an unknown number. The message was brief but ominous: "There's something about your family you need to know. The truth will change everything." She dismissed it as a prank at first, but the words lingered in her mind, their unsettling nature refusing to be ignored. When she mentioned the message to David over dinner, his reaction was immediate and uncharacteristically intense. He urged her to forget about it, insisting it was nothing but a cruel joke. His anxiety only deepened her suspicions. Why was he so quick to dismiss something that seemed so trivial? What was he hiding? That night, Sarah lay awake, replaying the message in her mind. She couldn't understand why it bothered her so much, but the unease it had sparked grew into a full-blown obsession. Despite her attempts to focus on her work and her marriage, the message kept intruding on her thoughts, driving a wedge between her and the life she once found so fulfilling. Unbeknownst to her, this was just the beginning of a journey that would unravel everything she believed about herself and her family. The day began like any other, with Sarah following her usual routine. But what started as a normal day quickly spiraled into disaster. At work, she was called into her boss's office and told that the company was downsizing, her position was being eliminated. Shocked and devastated, Sarah packed up her belongings, her mind racing with questions about what she would do next. The news felt like a punch to the gut, and she dreaded going home to tell David that she was now unemployed. When she arrived home, she found David sitting on the edge of their bed, his face pale and drawn. Without any preamble, he told her that he was leaving, that he could no longer stay in the marriage. His reasons were vague, filled with references to feeling trapped and needing space. The words barely registered as Sarah watched him pack a bag, each item he placed inside marking another crack in her already shattered world. By the time he walked out the door, Sarah was left standing in their now empty home, her life in ruins. In the silence that followed, Sarah wandered through the house in a daze, her thoughts numb with disbelief. It was during this aimless wandering that she stumbled upon an old, yellowed envelope hidden in her mother's antique desk. Her name was scrawled across the front in her mother's handwriting, but the envelope was sealed and had never been opened. With trembling hands, Sarah tore it open and found a letter inside. The words on the page hinted at a dark secret, one that would unravel the very fabric of her existence. The letter's contents were brief, but they carried a weight that threatened to crush Sarah. Her mother wrote about a woman named Margaret, someone Sarah had never heard of before, but who was apparently crucial to her family's history. The letter hinted at a deep connection between Margaret and Sarah, but offered no concrete details. Confused and desperate for answers, Sarah decided to visit her childhood home, hoping to find some clue that would make sense of this new mystery. As she walked through the familiar rooms of her old home, memories of her childhood came flooding back. She recalled her mother's laughter, the scent of fresh cookies in the kitchen, and the warmth of summer days spent playing in the yard. But as she searched for clues about Margaret, these memories took on a darker tone. She began to remember odd moments from her past, times when her mother seemed distant or preoccupied, conversations that abruptly ended when certain topics were broached. These incidents, once dismissed as insignificant, now felt loaded with meaning. Despite her efforts, Sarah found no concrete evidence of who Margaret was or what her connection to her family might be. Frustrated and feeling more lost than ever, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the brink of discovering something monumental. The name Margaret echoed in her mind, filling her with a sense of dread and anticipation. It was clear that this was just the beginning of a journey that would take her deeper into her family's past than she ever imagined. Determined to learn more about Margaret, Sarah reached out to her estranged aunt, her mother's sister. The two had never been close, but Sarah hoped that her aunt might have some answers. The conversation was strained, filled with long pauses and an underlying tension that made Sarah's heart race. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, her aunt revealed the truth. Margaret was not just a friend of her mother's, but her biological mother. The revelation hit Sarah like a freight train, shattering her sense of identity. Her aunt explained that Margaret had given birth to Sarah under difficult circumstances and had been forced to give her up. Sarah's mother had adopted her, raising her as her own. The truth had been kept from Sarah her entire life, and now, the foundation of everything she believed in was crumbling. Who was she, if not the daughter of the parents she had known? The discovery felt like staring into a mirror and seeing a stranger. The more she thought about it, the more disoriented she became. Shaken to her core, Sarah knew she needed to learn more about Margaret. She began searching through old photo albums and family records, desperate for any clue that would help her piece together the puzzle of her past. As she dug deeper, she uncovered a few faded photographs of her mother and Margaret together. The resemblance between Sarah and Margaret was striking, and for the first time, Sarah saw herself in a completely different light. The revelation was both shocking and heartbreaking, leaving her more determined than ever to uncover the truth about her origins. In the days that followed, Sarah struggled to come to terms with the truth about her mother. The revelation that Margaret was her biological mother had thrown her life into chaos, and the doubt gnawed at her, consuming her every thought. She tried to talk to her father, hoping for some clarity, but he was just as shocked as she was. He had known nothing about Margaret or the adoption, and his confusion only deepened Sarah's sense of betrayal. Their once close relationship became strained as they both grappled with the lies that had shaped their lives. As the reality of her situation set in, Sarah felt herself unraveling. The life she had known, the life she had built, now felt like a lie. The more she thought about it, the more lost she felt. The doubt gnawed at her, making her question everything about herself and her family. It was during this time of turmoil that she received a call from a private investigator who claimed to have information about Margaret. His voice was gruff but kind, and there was something in his tone that made Sarah feel like he could be trusted. Desperate for answers, she agreed to meet him, hoping that he could help her make sense of the chaos that her life had become. The investigator's warning echoed in her mind as they spoke. "You're playing with fire, Sarah. Be careful who you trust." His words were a stark reminder that she was treading dangerous ground. Despite the fear that gripped her, Sarah knew she had to press on. She couldn't stop now, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. The tension between her desire to know the truth and the fear of what she might find grew stronger with each passing day, creating a storm of emotions that threatened to consume her. Sarah met the private investigator at a small, dimly lit cafe on the outskirts of town. The man was older, with graying hair and deep lines etched into his face, evidence of a life spent uncovering other people's secrets. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries, diving straight into the story of Margaret's life. According to the investigator, Margaret had been forced to give up Sarah at birth to protect her from a powerful family. The details were murky, but it was clear that Margaret's life had been marked by hardship and betrayal. The investigator handed Sarah a small, leather-bound diary, Margaret's diary, saying it held the key to understanding her mother's story. Before Sarah could open the diary, her phone rang. It was David, his voice urgent as he insisted they meet. The suddenness of his call, after so long without contact, only added to her turmoil. Torn between wanting to dive into the diary and needing to know what David had to say, Sarah agreed to meet him. The investigator's parting words haunted her, "You're close to something big. Don't let your guard down." As she left the cafe, the diary clutched tightly in her hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that the truth was close, closer than it had ever been before. But she also knew that with the truth came consequences, ones that she might not be ready to face. Meeting David was fraught with tension. He looked different, tired, almost haunted. His first words were filled with regret. He confessed that he had left her to protect her from a truth that he believed would destroy her. He had been approached by members of the family connected to Margaret, who warned him that if Sarah continued her investigation, they would take drastic measures to keep their secrets hidden. His confession only deepened Sarah's resolve. She couldn't walk away now, not after everything she had learned. But as she left the meeting, the weight of the diary in her bag felt heavier than ever, a reminder that the answers she sought might come at a steep price. David's sudden reappearance and his confession left Sarah reeling. He explained that he had been blackmailed into working with the family, that they had threatened to ruin him if he didn't comply. But as he spoke, Sarah began to see that his actions were motivated not just by fear, but by a desire to protect her. "They're powerful, Sarah," he said, his voice trembling. "They've destroyed lives before, and they won't hesitate to do it again." His words sent a chill down her spine, but they also fueled her determination. She couldn't turn back now, not when the stakes were so high. Torn between her love for David and her need to uncover the truth, Sarah found herself at a crossroads. She knew she couldn't trust him completely, not after everything he had done, but she also couldn't ignore the fact that he had tried to protect her. The emotional chasm between them grew wider as Sarah resolved to continue her search, even if it meant putting herself in greater danger. As she walked away from David, the realization that she might lose him forever was like a weight pressing down on her chest. But she knew that she had to keep going, no matter the cost. The tension between them was palpable, and Sarah realized that their relationship could never be the same. The lies and secrets had created a rift that seemed impossible to bridge. As she watched David walk away, she felt a deep sense of loss, but also a renewed sense of purpose. She would continue her search for the truth, even if it meant losing everything she held dear. The stakes were higher than ever, but Sarah was determined to see this through to the end, no matter what it cost her. That night, Sarah finally opened Margaret's diary. The pages were fragile and yellowed with age, but the words written within were as powerful as if they had been penned yesterday. Margaret's life story unfolded in front of her, a tale of love and betrayal, of choices made under duress, and of a mother's enduring love for the child she was forced to abandon. The diary revealed that Margaret had been deeply in love with a man named Victor, a man her family had deemed unsuitable. Their affair had been passionate, but also dangerous, as it threatened the very foundations of Margaret's powerful family. As Sarah read, she felt an overwhelming connection to Margaret, a woman who had been both brave and tragic. The diary described how Margaret had been torn between her love for Victor and the pressure from her family to conform to their expectations. When she became pregnant, her family had forced her to give up the baby, sending her away to a distant relative's home until the child was born. Margaret had been heartbroken, but she had never stopped loving the child she had to give up, Sarah. Every page of the diary was filled with longing, regret, and a deep, abiding love that had transcended time and circumstance. But the diary also hinted at more, a conspiracy involving not just Margaret's family but also people in positions of power. The threat was real, and as Sarah delved deeper, she knew she was being watched. She began to notice subtle signs that someone was tracking her movements: unfamiliar cars parked near her home, anonymous phone calls that ended in silence, and the feeling of being followed whenever she left her apartment. The danger was growing, but Sarah's resolve only hardened. She had to find out the truth, no matter the cost. Determined to find Victor and learn the full story, Sarah began searching for him. Her investigation led her to a dilapidated part of the city, a neighborhood that had seen better days. The buildings were old and crumbling, the streets narrow and littered with debris. She felt out of place as she walked through the area, her steps echoing off the worn cobblestones. It was here that she found Victor, an elderly man living in a small, run-down apartment. His appearance was a stark contrast to the vibrant man described in Margaret's diary. Time and hardship had taken their toll on him, but his eyes still held a spark of the man he once was. When Sarah introduced herself, Victor's expression softened, and he invited her in. As they talked, Victor shared his memories of Margaret, his voice thick with emotion. He had loved her deeply, but their relationship had been doomed from the start. Her family, he explained, would stop at nothing to keep us apart. They ruined my life, Sarah. And when they took you from her, they broke her heart. Victor's words filled in the gaps that Margaret's diary had left, painting a picture of a woman who had fought against the odds, but ultimately lost. The conversation was emotional, but also brought a sense of closure to a chapter of Margaret's life. As they talked, Sarah noticed a man lingering outside the apartment, his presence unsettling. When she left Victor's place, she realized that the man was following her. Panic set in as she quickened her pace, trying to lose him in the maze of narrow streets. But the man was relentless, his footsteps growing louder behind her. Just as she thought she was trapped, she managed to slip into a small shop and out the back door, narrowly escaping her pursuer. The encounter left her shaken, but more determined than ever to uncover the truth. It was clear now that the stakes were higher than she had imagined, and that her life was in serious danger. The danger became more palpable as Sarah uncovered more about Margaret's family. They had ties to organized crime and were involved in numerous illegal activities. With James, a journalist she had confided in, she began to gather evidence, but the threats against her intensified. The more they uncovered, the more they realized the full extent of the family's power. They were not just dealing with a family secret, they were up against a powerful criminal syndicate with deep roots in the city's institutions. Sarah started receiving anonymous warnings, her movements were tracked, and those who tried to help her were silenced. One evening, she returned home to find her apartment ransacked. Nothing of value was taken, but the message was clear: back off, or face the consequences. The realization that her enemies were willing to go to such lengths to keep their secrets hidden filled Sarah with a cold dread, but also a fierce determination. She couldn't stop now, not when she was so close to exposing the truth. The danger was overwhelming, but she knew she had to keep going. Despite the increasing threats, Sarah and James pressed on. They carefully documented their findings, preparing to release the information to the public. But with each new piece of evidence, the risks grew greater. The family was closing in, and Sarah knew that if they weren't careful, they could both end up dead. The tension was palpable as they worked late into the night, knowing that they were running out of time. The power of the family was overwhelming, but Sarah pressed on, knowing that exposing their crimes was the only way to achieve justice for Margaret and for herself. Realizing that they were being hunted, Sarah and James devised a plan to lure the family's enforcers into a trap. They leaked false information, hoping to draw them out and expose them. The plan was risky, but it seemed to be working. They arranged a meeting with a key informant who promised to hand over documents that would implicate the family in a series of illegal activities. The night of the meeting, Sarah and James waited anxiously in a secluded location, but when the informant arrived, they realized too late that something was wrong. The informant was visibly nervous, and as he handed over the documents, shots rang out. In the chaos that followed, the informant was killed, and the documents were snatched away by a shadowy figure who disappeared into the night. Sarah and James barely escaped with their lives, realizing that they had been set up. The family had anticipated their move and had turned the trap against them. The betrayal left them shaken and vulnerable, with no leads and no allies. Sarah began to suspect that someone within their circle had betrayed them, feeding information to the family. The shock of the betrayal was compounded when David reappeared, this time with a shocking confession. He admitted that he had been working with the family all along, but not for the reasons she had feared. His motives remained unclear, and Sarah was left to wonder if she could trust anyone. The realization that they had been outmaneuvered shook Sarah to her core. The trap they had set had backfired, and now they were the ones on the run. But even in the face of this devastating setback, Sarah refused to give up. She knew she had to find another way to bring the family to justice, even if it meant going up against them alone. David's confession left Sarah reeling. He explained that he had been blackmailed into working with the family, but his actions had been driven by fear, not malice. The family had threatened to destroy him if he didn't comply, and in his desperation to protect both himself and Sarah, he had made choices he now regretted deeply. But what hurt Sarah the most was the realization that David had kept the truth from her, not out of love, but out of fear. The emotional chasm between them grew as Sarah realized that their relationship could never be the same. Faced with the full weight of the truth, Sarah knew she had to make a choice: continue her investigation and risk everything, or walk away and try to rebuild her life with David. The decision weighed heavily on her, pulling her in two directions. On one hand, she wanted to believe that David had acted out of love, that he had been trying to shield her from harm. On the other, she couldn't ignore the lies, the secrets, the pain that had come from his actions. In the end, Sarah knew she couldn't walk away, not now, not when she was so close to the truth. In a tearful confrontation, Sarah and David confessed their love for each other, but they both knew that love alone wasn't enough to bridge the gap that had formed between them. "I have to do this," Sarah said softly. "I have to find out the truth, no matter what it costs me." David looked at her with a mixture of sadness and acceptance, knowing that her decision meant they could never go back to the way things were. As they parted ways, Sarah felt a deep sense of loss, but also a renewed determination. She would continue her search for the truth, even if it meant losing David forever. After David left, Sarah found herself alone again, but this time, the solitude brought a strange sense of clarity. She decided to visit her mother's grave, seeking solace and guidance in the one place that had always brought her peace. The cemetery was quiet, the air thick with the scent of blooming flowers. As she stood by her mother's grave, Sarah spoke aloud, telling her mother everything that had happened, everything she had discovered. It was as if she was trying to connect with the woman who had loved her so deeply, even from beyond the grave. As she spoke, she felt a sense of calm wash over her, a moment of peace amidst the chaos of her life. She realized that, despite everything, she was stronger than she had ever been. She had faced the truth, no matter how painful it had been, and she had survived. But she also knew that the storm was far from over. The family she had been investigating was still out there, and they were more dangerous than ever. She could feel the tension building, like the air before a thunderstorm, heavy with the promise of violence. Sarah left the cemetery with a renewed sense of purpose. She knew that the final confrontation was coming, and she needed to be ready. The peace she had found at her mother's grave gave her the strength to face what lay ahead. She would continue to fight, not just for herself, but for Margaret, for the mother who had sacrificed so much for her. The storm was coming, but this time, Sarah would face it head-on, armed with the truth and the strength she had found within herself. Just as Sarah and James were preparing to make their final move, the unthinkable happened. They were betrayed by someone they had trusted, someone who had been helping them gather evidence against the family. The betrayal came at the worst possible moment, just as they were about to expose the truth. The informant, who had promised them crucial documents, was found dead, and all their plans were thrown into chaos. The family had anticipated their every move, and now they were on the run. The betrayal was a devastating blow to Sarah, one that nearly broke her. She had been so close to the truth, only to have it snatched away at the last moment. The realization that someone she had trusted had been working against her all along was almost too much to bear. The sense of loss and betrayal was overwhelming, and for a moment, she considered giving up. But then she remembered Margaret and the sacrifices she had made, and knew she couldn't walk away now. Despite the setback, Sarah found a new clue in Margaret's diary, one that she had overlooked before. It was a reference to a hidden safe deposit box, one that Margaret had set up before she died. The box was supposed to contain documents that could bring down the family once and for all. It was a small glimmer of hope in an otherwise bleak situation, but it was enough to keep Sarah going. She knew she had to find that box, no matter what it took. The discovery of the safe deposit box reignited Sarah's determination. The box was hidden in a bank on the other side of town, in a nondescript building that looked like any other. But Sarah knew that what lay inside could change everything. With James by her side, she entered the bank, her heart pounding with anticipation. The box was old and dusty, and as she opened it, she held her breath, unsure of what she would find. Inside, Sarah found a stack of documents, neatly organized and clearly important. As she and James sifted through them, they realized that these were the documents they had been searching for, the ones that detailed the family's crimes, their connections to organized crime, and the lengths they had gone to cover up their dark past. But there was more. The documents also revealed that the family had been involved in the deaths of several people who had tried to expose them, including Margaret. The revelation was both shocking and heartbreaking. Margaret had died because she had tried to protect Sarah, and now Sarah had the proof she needed to bring her killers to justice. But she also knew that having this information put her in even greater danger. The family would stop at nothing to keep these secrets hidden, and now they were coming for her. But Sarah was ready. She had the truth on her side, and she was prepared to fight for it, no matter what the cost. With the documents in hand, Sarah and James knew they had to act quickly. They couldn't go to the authorities, too many of them were in the family's pocket. Instead, they decided to go public, to release the information to the media and let the world see the truth. It was a risky move, but it was their only option. They carefully planned their next steps, knowing that the family would try to stop them at any cost. As they prepared to release the documents, the tension was palpable. Every sound, every shadow, seemed to hold a threat. They knew the family's enforcers were close, but they couldn't let fear stop them. Finally, the moment came. They sent the documents to a trusted journalist, someone they knew would make sure the story was told. But just as they hit send, the door burst open, and the family's enforcers stormed in. The showdown that followed was intense and brutal. Sarah and James fought back with everything they had, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. It seemed like all hope was lost until the police arrived. The journalist had alerted the authorities, and they had come just in time. The enforcers were arrested, and Sarah and James were finally safe. But the victory was bittersweet. They had won, but the cost had been high. The aftermath of the showdown left Sarah reeling. The family had been brought to justice, but at what cost? She had lost so much: her sense of security, her trust in others, and her relationship with David. The past few months had taken a toll on her, both physically and emotionally. She felt exhausted, drained, and unsure of what to do next. But she knew that she couldn't just walk away. There were still people who needed her help, people who had been wronged by the family and were still seeking justice. As she tried to make sense of everything that had happened, Sarah found herself drawn back to the place where it had all begun, her childhood home. The house was empty now, filled only with memories and echoes of the past. But it was here, surrounded by the ghosts of her past, that she found the strength to move forward. She realized that she wasn't alone, that she had people who cared about her and who would support her no matter what. With a renewed sense of purpose, Sarah decided to rebuild her life. She reconnected with her father, who expressed deep regret for the secrets that had torn their family apart. Together, they began to heal the wounds of the past and rebuild their relationship. It wasn't easy, but it was a start. And as Sarah began to pick up the pieces of her life, she knew that she was stronger than she had ever been before. The path to healing was long and difficult, but Sarah was determined to walk it. She started therapy to help process the trauma of the past few months, and slowly, she began to heal. The sessions were painful at first, forcing her to confront the darkest parts of her past, but they were also cathartic. She learned to forgive, not just those who had wronged her, but also herself, for the mistakes she had made along the way. Through therapy, Sarah began to gain a new perspective on her life. She realized that she had been carrying the weight of her past for far too long, and that it was time to let it go. She started to see herself not as a victim, but as a survivor, someone who had faced unimaginable challenges and come out stronger on the other side. This shift in perspective allowed her to begin rebuilding her life, piece by piece. As she continued to heal, Sarah also reconnected with the people who mattered most to her. She rekindled old friendships and made new ones, surrounding herself with a support system that helped her through the toughest times. Slowly but surely, she began to find joy in life again. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when the pain of the past threatened to overwhelm her. But Sarah was determined to keep moving forward, to create a new life for herself, one that was built on strength and resilience. Just as Sarah was starting to find her footing again, David reappeared in her life. He showed up at her door one evening, looking worn and weary, but determined. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he said, his voice filled with regret. "But I need to explain. I need you to understand why I did what I did." Sarah was hesitant at first, unsure if she was ready to reopen old wounds. But she also knew that she needed closure, that she needed to hear his side of the story. David explained that he had been blackmailed into working with the family, that they had threatened to ruin him if he didn't comply. But what hurt Sarah the most was when he admitted that he had kept the truth from her to protect himself, not just her. "I was a coward," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have trusted you, but I was too afraid of losing everything. And in the end, I lost you anyway." His words cut deep, but they also brought a strange sense of relief. For the first time, Sarah saw David for who he really was, a flawed, vulnerable man who had made terrible mistakes. The conversation was painful, but it also brought a sense of closure that Sarah hadn't realized she needed. She wasn't ready to forgive David completely, but she also didn't want to carry the anger and resentment with her any longer. "I need time," she told him, her voice steady. "I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were, but I'm willing to try and see where we go from here." It wasn't a promise, but it was a start, and for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. With David back in her life, Sarah faced a new challenge, rebuilding their relationship from the ground up. It wasn't easy, and there were times when she doubted whether they could ever truly move past what had happened. But both of them were committed to trying, to being honest with each other in a way they hadn't been before. They set boundaries, agreed to take things slowly, and to give each other the space they needed to heal. Their relationship wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension and pain. But there were also moments of joy, of laughter, of connection. Slowly but surely, they began to find their way back to each other. They started spending time together, going on walks, cooking dinner, talking about their hopes and fears. It was a process, one that required patience and understanding from both of them. As they rebuilt their relationship, Sarah also began to rebuild her life. She found a new job, one that allowed her to use her skills and passions in a way that felt meaningful. She moved into a new apartment, one that was filled with light and warmth, a space that felt like a fresh start. And as she settled into her new life, she began to feel a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. As Sarah continued to heal, she found herself thinking more and more about Margaret. The woman who had given her life, who had loved her so deeply, and who had sacrificed everything to protect her. Sarah realized that she wanted to honor Margaret's memory, to do something that would keep her mother's legacy alive. And so, she decided to start a foundation in Margaret's name, dedicated to helping others who had been wronged by powerful forces, just as Margaret had been. The foundation quickly became a passion project for Sarah, giving her a renewed sense of purpose. She worked tirelessly to raise awareness about the issues that had affected her mother, using her platform to speak out against corruption and injustice. The foundation also provided support to individuals and families who had been impacted by similar situations, offering them the resources and assistance they needed to rebuild their lives. Through the foundation, Sarah was able to connect with others who had experienced similar struggles, creating a community of support and solidarity. The work was challenging, but it was also deeply rewarding, and it gave Sarah a sense of fulfillment that she hadn't felt in years. As she watched the foundation grow, she knew that she was doing exactly what Margaret would have wanted, turning her pain into something that could help others, and ensuring that her mother's legacy would live on. The impact of Sarah's work through the foundation was far-reaching. The story of Margaret's life, and the downfall of the family that had tried to silence her, inspired others to come forward with their own stories of injustice. People from all walks of life began reaching out to Sarah, sharing their experiences and seeking help. The foundation became a beacon of hope for those who had been wronged, offering them a chance to fight back and reclaim their lives. As more and more people came forward, the ripple effect of Sarah's work became evident. The stories she helped to uncover sparked investigations, led to legal actions, and brought about real change. Corrupt officials were exposed, powerful families were held accountable, and lives were transformed. The work was difficult, and there were times when Sarah felt overwhelmed by the enormity of the task. But she also knew that she was making a difference, and that kept her going. Sarah's journey had come full circle. She had started out seeking the truth about her own life, but in the process, she had uncovered something much bigger, a movement for justice and accountability that would continue to grow long after she was gone. The work wasn't finished, and there were still battles to be fought, but Sarah knew that she had found her place in the world. She was no longer defined by her past, but by the impact she was making on the lives of others. Just when Sarah thought she had uncovered all there was to know about her past, a new revelation came to light. One day, she received a letter from a woman who claimed to be Margaret's sister, Sarah's aunt. The letter was brief, but it mentioned details about Margaret's life that only a close family member would know. The woman asked to meet with Sarah, offering to fill in the remaining gaps in Margaret's story and provide the closure Sarah had been seeking. The meeting took place in a small cafe, where Sarah finally came face to face with the woman who had been a part of Margaret's life. Her aunt was older, with gray hair and kind eyes that reminded Sarah of her mother. As they talked, Sarah learned more about Margaret's early life, her dreams, and the sacrifices she had made. Her aunt shared stories that brought Margaret to life in a way that no diary or document ever could. The conversation was emotional, but it also brought a sense of peace that Sarah hadn't realized she needed. She finally felt like she had a complete picture of who Margaret was, and why she had made the choices she had. The meeting with her aunt provided the final pieces of the puzzle, allowing Sarah to understand her mother's life in a way she never had before. It was a moment of closure, one that allowed Sarah to fully embrace her future, knowing that she had finally made peace with her past. With the newfound understanding of her mother's life, Sarah knew it was time to say a final goodbye. She returned to the cemetery, this time with David by her side. Together, they stood by Margaret's grave, the sun setting in the distance, casting a warm glow over the headstones. Sarah took a deep breath and pulled out the last letter she had found in Margaret's diary, a letter addressed to her, written just days before Margaret's death. As Sarah read the letter aloud, her voice steady and filled with emotion, she felt a deep connection to the woman who had given her life. The letter was filled with words of love, encouragement, and hope. Margaret had written about her dreams for Sarah, her regrets, and her unwavering belief that Sarah would grow up to be a strong, compassionate woman. "You are my greatest joy," the letter ended, "and I am so proud of the woman you have become." As the last words of the letter echoed in the stillness of the cemetery, Sarah felt a sense of closure wash over her. She had finally made peace with her past, with Margaret's choices, and with the life she had been given. The pain and confusion that had once defined her had been replaced with a deep sense of acceptance and understanding. She was ready to move forward, not as the woman who had lost everything, but as the woman who had found herself. With the final goodbye behind her, Sarah felt a sense of lightness that she hadn't experienced in years. She and David moved into a new home, one that they had chosen together, free from the shadows of the past. The house was filled with light and warmth, a symbol of the fresh start they were both ready to embrace. As they unpacked boxes and decorated rooms, Sarah felt a sense of hope and possibility for the future. The new chapter of their lives wasn't without its challenges, but Sarah was ready to face them head-on. She and David continued to work on their relationship, building trust and understanding with each passing day. They knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were committed to walking it together. And as they settled into their new life, they both felt a sense of peace and contentment that had been missing for so long. For Sarah, the new home represented more than just a physical space. It was a symbol of the journey she had been on, and the strength she had found within herself. She was no longer defined by her past, but by the future she was creating for herself and those she loved. As she stood in the doorway of her new home, looking out at the world beyond, she knew that she was ready for whatever came next. As Sarah settled into her new life, she realized that one of the most important lessons she had learned was the power of forgiveness. It had been a difficult journey, filled with pain, betrayal, and loss. But through it all, she had discovered that forgiveness wasn't about excusing the wrongs that had been done to her. It was about letting go of the anger and resentment that had held her back for so long. Sarah learned to forgive those who had wronged her, including David, her father, and even the members of the family who had caused so much pain. But perhaps most importantly, she learned to forgive herself. She forgave herself for the mistakes she had made, for the times she had doubted her own strength, and for the moments when she had been too afraid to face the truth. It was this forgiveness that allowed her to finally find peace. With forgiveness came a sense of freedom that Sarah had never known before. She no longer felt burdened by the weight of her past, but instead, she felt empowered by the lessons she had learned. She knew that she was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than she had ever been. And as she looked to the future, she did so with a sense of hope and optimism, knowing that she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The story of Sarah's life had been one of loss and discovery, of pain and healing, of betrayal and forgiveness. But now, as she stood on the threshold of a new chapter, she knew that it was just the beginning. She had come a long way from the woman she had been when she first discovered that old letter. She had faced unimaginable challenges, uncovered painful truths, and lost people she had loved. But through it all, she had found herself. Sarah was no longer defined by the secrets of her past, but by the strength she had found in overcoming them. She was ready to embrace the future, not as the woman who had lost everything, but as the woman who had gained so much. As she looked out at the world, she felt a sense of excitement and anticipation for what lay ahead. She knew that there would be challenges, but she also knew that she was ready to face them, with the lessons of her past guiding her forward. As Sarah stepped into her new life, she carried with her the love of those she had lost, the strength she had found within herself, and the hope of a brighter future. She knew that whatever came next, she was ready. The story of her life was far from over, it was just beginning. And as she took that first step into the rest of her life, she did so with a heart full of hope, knowing that she had the strength to face whatever lay ahead.